Hello, and welcome to Grade.com Talks. Today, we're talking with Maya Rogers, Integrated Marketing Manager at the Paleontological Research Institution, an organization that pursues and integrates education and research, and interprets the history and systems of the Earth into its life to increase knowledge, educate society, and encourage wise stewardship of the Earth. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about an organization that is a national leader in the development of informal earth science education resources for educators and the general public. Hello, Maya. Welcome to Grade.com Talks. We're excited to have you here.
Hi, thank you. I'm really excited.
Wonderful. Could you please describe Paleontological Research Institution for someone who is not familiar with your work?
Yeah, of course. So the Paleontological Research Institution, or as PRI as we like to call it, since it's a bit of a mouthful, is located in Ithaca, New York, and it makes up many different parts of our organization. So to break it down a little bit further, we focus mainly on a couple of different areas. The first one being our collections. So PRI acquires, preserves, records, and makes available information about specimen collections that serve as a systematic record of life on Earth. Our collections are global in their extent, but we have two particular areas of strength, one being Cenozoic marine invertebrates, especially mollusks, from the southeastern U.S., Caribbean, and northern Latin America, as well as Paleozoic marine invertebrates from New York State. With more than 7 million specimens, PRI's fossil collection is actually one of the 10 largest invertebrate paleontological collections in the United States. Aside from collections, we also are a center for scholarship in paleontology, evolutionary biology, and conservation paleobiology, as well as education and outreach through our two educational venues, the Museum of the Earth and the Cayuga Nature Center. And finally, we also disseminate our own research and science communication to the research community through a variety of different publications, such as Bulletins of American Paleontology, Digital Atlas of Ancient Life, and our teacher-friendly guides.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So your organization covers, works in different areas. You mentioned the collections, you mentioned on preparing the educational researches, and you also mentioned about the research that you do. So although it's all surrounded about earth science and conservation, paleontology and paleobiology, but the execution of it differs. So it's very interesting to see the variety of your work that you do. On your mission statement, it indicates that you are increasing the awareness about earth science, and you're also focusing on more on the research of the earth science. Could you please describe for someone who is not familiar with the earth science, what is the earth science, what does it cover, and why is it important to study it?
Yeah, it's really important to study right now, and especially with our informal education to our many different audiences. Like I said, we have, lots of people with PhD backgrounds, but we also are really trying to educate K through 12, undergraduates, graduates through our different venues, and specifically kind of tackling these larger questions like evolution, sustainability, conservation paleobiology, which I can go into a little bit more if you want about conservation paleobiology and kind of why that's really important right now. It's definitely talked about in different areas of our organizations to different audiences, but basically it's really helping us use the past to inform our future. And so by talking about conservation paleobiology, which applies paleontological data and methods in novel ways to prevent species extinction, restore habitats, and sustain the benefits people attain from ecosystems, we can help inform decisions people are making in conservation with the best available science and impact very early on, even if we don't know other different kinds of information. So those are kind of what we're focusing on right now. But we have, a wide range of different educational resources as well that deal with earth science.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you mentioned about conservation paleobiology, studying what was done before in order to prevent something not happening in the future, especially the extinction of the species. As you know, for our viewers and listeners don't know, in the next 10 years, there are about more than 1 million species that are about to go extinct. So it's very important to study pre-factum species and their habitats so they don't become extinct. Could you please indicate and describe more in detail how studying previous ones and how conservation paleobiology in example of specific species has helped to stop the extinction, to increase the population of the specific species?
I can definitely go into a little bit of detail. I'm definitely not one of the experts on the matter because we have a lot of different researchers and paleontologists on our staff, but conservation paleobiology utilizes data from geological records to provide an otherwise unobtainable long-term perspective on modern conservation and restoration issues. And these records include looking at sediment cores, ice cores, tree ring series, fossils, and other natural archives that provide environmental or biological information about the past so that paleobiologists can quickly and cost effectively provide data and insight on demand with immediate impact to our future of conservation.
Although, thank you for explaining it. Although you are not, as you mentioned, paleobiology scientists, having general understanding of it is important. Your organization also has several public venues where people can come and learn about different paleontological issues. Could you please describe to us what kind of what those venues are and what do they cover, and if I or our viewers and listeners would like to visit it, what they will learn?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the really great parts about our organization is while PRI is the umbrella to our educational venues, we maintain the Museum of the Earth and the Cayuga Nature Center here in Ithaca, New York. So the Museum of the Earth covers many different parts of earth science, but we also have some temporary exhibitions going on right now, as well as a new permanent exhibit that are super important, I think, to educating our different communities. So one of those new permanent exhibits is our new climate change exhibit. And so this is called Changing Climate, Our Future, Our Choice. And this really covers what we can do now in order to stop the effects of climate change, specifically within our own households. So there's this really great interactive display of a house and how you can make your house more sustainable. And you can kind of do this little hands-on activity that shows you how much different electricity you're using within your own home. So that's really great and really helps promote our mission of talking to people about climate change education, which is something that we feel really strong about. Along with that, we have many different permanent exhibitions, including our Hyde Park Mastodon, which is definitely a fan favorite, as well as our new temporary exhibit, which is called Daring to Dig, Women in Paleontology. And it talks about lots of different historic voices of women in paleontology who paved the way and how that's shaping modern paleontology. We launched it during Women's History Month. So we're really trying to highlight some women in paleontology who are often overlooked in the history of what kids are really learning in school and what the public knows about paleontologists. So that's really, really exciting to see. And really starting to bring in a lot more people as we open more to the public. And then the Cayuga Nature Center talks a lot about climate change education as well. We also have a bunch of animal ambassadors. So right now we actually have two foxes, Daisy and Cinder, who are from a rehabilitation center. So these animals can't be released into the wild. And they have their home at the Cayuga Nature Center, where we use them for educational programming to inform the public about different animals and species. We also have a bunch of miles of trails that the public can hike and get outdoors, learn a little bit more about nature. And inside our lodge, we have a couple of different live exhibits with tons of live animals that visitors can experience and learn all about.
Wow. The fact that you have several permanent exhibitions that are very educational for people is very important. You mentioned about the one that a demonstration of the house where people can see what they can do inside their house to fight against climate change, to take some actions that can help them to build more sustainable lifestyle. And at Cayuga Nature Center, the fact that you have two ambassadors, fox ambassadors, ambassadors, and you have named them, and people can interact with them and understand the importance of animals and protecting the species, as well as go to the hikes around the natural center. It's very important. So it's not just boring as we might think, that monotonic way, but it's very interactive, it's very engaging, and to some extent it's very athletic as well. So you get to learn, you get to interact, and you get to do some exercises. So that's very beautiful to have. Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that your organization focuses on collecting different paleontological materials. And could you please tell us more in detail? You talked about several collections, but in more detail, how do you sustain those collections? How do you find items to be in part of your collection? And why is it important to track the history through those collectible items to 2 billion years that the Earth is age of?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, we focus on invertebrate fossils at the Paleontological Research Institution. So we're not necessarily focusing on dinosaur bones, as we are focusing on shells and mollusks that actually relate a lot to conservation paleobiology and learning more from the past about the future in terms of conservation efforts. So we have a collection staff that is super dedicated to this role and doing a lot of the painstaking, very mundane things that come along with collections. You know, that can just be writing specimen labels, reorganizing specimen drawers in our collections facilities, which is a lot of work and a lot of care is taken into preserving these specimens so that our researchers, our graduate students, can then use these to inform their research that they're working on. We also, so usually in non-pandemic times, we'll have people going out into the field, collecting fossils on different fossil field trips along the Finger Lakes, the different parks here. There are sometimes fossils found, but we also do have some people who find fossils in their backyard, who will bring them into the museum, people who are, you know, in the area, and they'll find something that looks like a fossil, they'll bring it into us. We'll have our staff look at it, and then sometimes they'll end up donating it to our collection. You know, a really great example of this, this is very different than our other specimens, but our Hyde Park mastodon, for those that are not familiar with the story, was actually found when an owner in Hyde Park, New York, of his house was digging to, I think he was creating, he was filling in a pond, and they dug up like what was under a bunch of mud and layers of dirt. They started to find these mastodon bones. And so that mastodon was then donated to the Museum of the Earth. So our collections can come from our own collection staff, but also is coming from people from all over the world and all across New York.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying that you collect fossils and specimens, and that the fact that preservation of them is quite a heavy job. You might think it's just putting it and just storing it, but in the fact they require a lot of care. They require a lot of attention, and your organization is doing that. And the fact that everyone can find fossils if they search for them, whether it's in their backyard, whether it's in parks, or whether it's a field trips that researchers and scientists do that. And thank you for sharing the story that the person was able to find it in the Hyde in the park and then donate it to the Museum of the Earth. So it gives a hope that if someone is doing renovation in their backyard or going to the park, they can find something that is very important that can help researchers and scientists that are part of your organizations to do conservation by paleobiology research that can help us to fight climate change and build more sustainable way of living. And you mentioned that the graduate students can come and they can work within your within the PRI. Could you please tell us more about the corporation, the partnership that you have with Cornell University, and how do students come, and what part of their learning can being engaged in PRI help?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really lucky that we have a lot of different great relationships with different schools, specifically Cornell University, which is also in Ithaca, New York. And the Museum of the Earth and PRI go way back to ties to Cornell University. We are affiliated with Cornell, which means that we do have the opportunity to work with a lot of different students. Our director is also a professor at Cornell, and we are able to take on a lot of PhD students as well as graduate students who want to do their research with us in geology or paleontology. So it really provides a really great learning space for them to learn at one of the leading paleontologist organizations and to really have access to these collections that, like I said, we're one of the top 10 collections in the United States. And so that really gives them access to resources they might not have otherwise. And there's a whole long history of, how PRI was founded, but it was founded by Cornell professors and people working at Cornell who took Ezra Cornell's fossil collections and kind of started this whole organization from the ground up. And we've really been able to have some support from Cornell University over the years to really build up our organization.
It's a great opportunity for students, graduate students and PhD students who are studying geology and who are studying paleontology to come and to familiarize themselves with the collections, with the work that is available in a couple of miles from their university, and having this resource center and having this institution that makes research and makes education more accessible is very, very important. And you mentioned that they do themselves a lot of researches that can eventually be controversial to paleontology and development of paleontology in general. You mentioned earlier, we talked about how your organization really focuses. One attribute of your organization is focusing on research on paleontology. Can you please tell us what are some of the recent researches you have been focusing in on? And if you could highlight the results of them, that would be very wonderful.
Yeah, so kind of along with the conservation paleobiology factor, one of our PhD students was working on an oyster exhibition where they talk about how oysters impact conservation biology. And I can look a little bit more in detail at some of the results of that study. I don't know them off the top of my head.
That's all right.
Sorry.
The fact that the study was that the specific study was done is very. It indicates that the research and the studies and the progress is being made not just on the paper, not just on the on mouse, but in action. So PhD students and PhD members of the PRI are able to do research and contribute to the science. Is very, very important. If someone would,
I was just going to say, I think one of the really great parts too about having the educational venues is that, a lot of times research is very behind the scenes. And a lot of people like me who might not have as much of that scientific background aren't really able to understand that hands-on factor or really understand the research just from that perspective. And so by having the Museum of the Earth, we were able to showcase that research in a small exhibition with some posters and specimens on a table. And so that really gives the public that different perspective that they might not have seen otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For someone who is not, as you mentioned, familiar with the scientific terms, it might be hard to understand and grasp the full aspect of the research to fully understand them. But having them as an exhibition in the Museum of the Earth enables us, people who are outside of the science, to be a part of the science. So incorporating that is very meaningful. If someone would like to support Paleontological Research Institution, how can they do that?
Yeah, we have our website, puriweb.org. And if you go to that website, you can find a donation button where you can donate to the organization. But there's other ways to get involved. You can also volunteer if you're local. You can also buy a membership. So we have different tiered memberships to our different areas of our organization that gain you access to our different educational venues as well as different events throughout the year.
Absolutely. The link to the PRI website will be provided in the description. So you listening and viewing can go to the website and familiarize yourself with the work Paleontological Research Institution does. And if you would like to support them, you can make financial contribution to help them do more research and help us to fight the climate change. Thank you so much, Maya. It was wonderful to get to know you and the great work your team and the whole organization are doing at the Paleontological Research Institution.
Thank you so much for having me.
For you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please press like and share button because this will show the YouTube and podcast algorithm that this conversation is important. The studying paleontology and studying the earth science is very important for us to fight climate change and make a sustainable living. Thank you and see you in the next episode.